Hello, I'm Hope Logan. I'm an actor on Bold and the Beautiful, and many people really love both me and our Bold and the Beautiful drama. So I've come here to share updates about my beloved Bold and the Beautiful. Everyone, please subscribe and support me. If you do, I will keep coming every day with new updates for you. The world of the Bold and the Beautiful has never been short on shocking twists, dramatic betrayals, or characters whose lives can change in the blink of an eye. Yet even by the soap's unpredictable standards, the transformation unfolding around Will Spencer feels unusually jarring, almost as if viewers have suddenly stepped into an entirely different story. A young man who has long been portrayed as kind-hearted, level-headed, and compassionate is now being pushed toward an increasingly dark and unsettling path, leaving longtime fans wondering whether they're even watching the same character anymore. The writers appear determined to reshape Bill Spencer and Katie Logan's son into someone consumed by anger, violence, and instability, while the people around him begin treating him as though he's become a genuine threat. At the center of this growing storm stands Ridge Forrester, whose suspicions have spiraled so dramatically that he has convinced himself not only that his son, R.J. Forrester, is in danger, but that Electra Forrester could be next. What makes the situation even more unsettling is how quickly everyone seems willing to accept this frightening new narrative without questioning whether it reflects the Will Spencer audiences have known for years. Looking back, the contrast couldn't be more striking. Until recently, Will had rarely shown any signs of physical aggression, and the only memorable moment where he threw a punch came during a situation that most viewers considered completely justified. When Remy Price relentlessly stalked and terrorized Electra, Will stepped forward to protect her, knocking Remy down in an act of courage rather than cruelty. That wasn't the behavior of an unstable young man losing control. It was the instinctive response of someone defending the woman he cared about from genuine danger. Fans celebrated that moment because it revealed Will's loyalty and bravery, qualities that had always defined him. It was heroic, protective, and entirely consistent with the thoughtful young man audiences had grown to admire over the years. Everything seemed to change, however, once tensions exploded at the Bikini Bar. Instead of the calm and composed Will everyone expected, viewers watched as RJ openly provoked him, taunting him with smug confidence while putting his hands on Electra in a way that immediately intensified the confrontation. The atmosphere became charged with resentment, frustration, and simmering hostility until Will finally snapped and threw a punch. Even then, the moment felt strangely disconnected from everything audiences knew about him, almost as if someone else had suddenly taken over his personality. Of course, many fans couldn't ignore the fact that RJ's arrogant behavior has made him one of the least popular characters on the canvas, and more than a few viewers admitted they understood why someone might want to punch him. Still, regardless of how irritating RJ may be, seeing Will react with violence instead of restraint marked the first unmistakable sign that something fundamental about his character was beginning to shift. The conflict only escalated from there, becoming even more complicated when RJ later showed up at Will's own home. Instead of respecting Will's repeated demands to leave, RJ remained inside the house, despite being told over and over that he was trespassing. There is little question that RJ crossed a serious line by refusing to leave someone else's property, and his stubborn refusal only fueled an already volatile situation. Yet, when Will responded by hitting him repeatedly, the scene suddenly crossed into territory that felt uncomfortable, even for viewers who believed RJ had provoked the entire encounter. Yes, RJ should never have barged into the house in the first place, but the repeated blows painted Will in a far harsher light than anyone expected. It was another deliberate step toward portraying him as someone increasingly unable to control his temper, regardless of how much responsibility RJ bore for creating the confrontation. Ironically, the outrage surrounding Will's actions becomes even more puzzling when compared to the long history of outrageous behavior from the Forrester family themselves. Time and time again, the Forresters have stormed into places where they weren't invited, issued impossible demands, and behaved as though every room they entered belonged to them. Whether confronting the Logans or inserting themselves into conflicts that had nothing to do with them, barging into other people's lives has practically become a family tradition. Yet suddenly, everyone acts as though RJ's trespassing should be overlooked, while Will alone bears the full weight of public condemnation. Katie Logan reacts with visible panic after learning her son struck RJ again, while even Bill Spencer lectures Will about using his head instead of his fists. Hearing Dollar Bill deliver that particular advice feels almost surreal, considering his own explosive history, making the entire situation feel less like natural storytelling and more like an obvious attempt to reshape audience perception of Will. As the episodes continue, it becomes increasingly clear that the writers have no intention of slowing down this transformation. Instead, they seem determined to push Will further into what can only be described as a full-fledged villain arc, with Ridge leading the charge against him every step of the way. Ridge's newest theory stretches credibility even further, as he now believes Will poses an actual danger to Electra herself. The mere suggestion that Will could one day become physically violent toward the very woman he has repeatedly tried to protect feels astonishingly disconnected from everything viewers have witnessed over the years. Nevertheless, the story keeps nudging audiences toward accepting this frightening possibility, almost as though they are expected to forget the character's entire history overnight. The result is a version of Will Spencer that feels less like organic character development and more like a complete reinvention. Even Will's appearance seems carefully redesigned to support this darker image. Gone is the clean-cut, neatly groomed young man whose polished style reflected his calm personality. In his place stands someone with shaggy hair, rough facial scruff, and clothing deliberately chosen to make him appear edgier, rougher, and somehow more dangerous. The visual transformation is so obvious that it almost feels as though the costume department received direct instructions to make Will look like trouble before he even says a word. Unfortunately for the writers, however, one major obstacle remains impossible to ignore. The person Will keeps fighting is RJ, a character who happens to be one of the most disliked figures currently appearing on The Bold and the Beautiful. Rather than making audiences fear Will, many viewers continue questioning why the show expects them to sympathize with RJ in the first place. What makes this entire storyline even harder to accept is how selectively the show's history is being remembered. Countless characters have committed acts of violence that were far more shocking than anything Will has done, yet they were never permanently branded as dangerous monsters. Brooke Logan recently slapped Katie with enough force to stun everyone watching, while years earlier, Ridge himself threw Bill Spencer off a balcony during one of their explosive confrontations. Bill retaliated in equally outrageous fashion by having Justin Barber arrange for Ridge to be tossed out of a helicopter, a plotline so extreme that it remains unforgettable. Going back even further, Taylor Hayes once shot Bill in the back after learning about his relationship with Steffi Forrester. And despite the severity of that crime, the fallout eventually faded. Compared to those explosive moments, Will punching RJ after repeated provocation hardly seems deserving of the terrifying reputation now being forced upon him. As the accusations against Will continue to grow louder, another uncomfortable truth becomes impossible to ignore. Ridge seems determined to focus every ounce of suspicion on Bill Spencer's son, while conveniently overlooking the far darker history within his own family. Thomas Forrester has committed acts throughout the years that went far beyond a few punches thrown during heated confrontations, yet somehow his past barely enters Ridge's conversation when discussing dangerous behavior. Instead, Ridge speaks as though Will's recent actions place him in an entirely different category, despite the long record of violence that already exists among the Forresters themselves. That selective outrage leaves the entire situation feeling deeply unbalanced, especially for longtime viewers who remember exactly what these characters have done. it becomes increasingly difficult to accept Ridge's moral authority when he appears so willing to erase history in order to paint Will as the newest villain in town. Thomas's history alone tells a far more disturbing story than anything Will has ever done. Fans still remember the rooftop fight between Thomas and Liam Spencer, a confrontation that erupted while Thomas was desperately trying to keep Hope Logan close to him. Over the years, Thomas also struck Rick Forrester and even punched his own father, Ridge, proving that losing control was hardly an isolated incident. His behavior escalated beyond ordinary fistfights when he attempted to set Rick's home on fire and even blew up Rick's car, actions that crossed the line from emotional outbursts into serious criminal territory. Those weren't simply moments of anger. They were deliberate acts capable of causing devastating consequences. Compared to those incidents, Will punching RJ after repeated provocation and after RJ trespassed into his own home feels remarkably minor. Yet somehow Will is the one now being portrayed as the dangerous young man everyone should fear. Electra herself adds another layer of contradiction to the story. She now stands beside Ridge, insisting that she dislikes violence. But viewers haven't forgotten what happened when Luna Nozawa entered her orbit. Fueled by anger and emotion, Electra struck Luna while Luna was pregnant with Will's baby, hitting her with enough force to send her crashing to the ground. No one is pretending Luna was innocent, because she certainly wasn't. But the reality remains that Electra assaulted a pregnant woman in a moment of rage. That history makes the current narrative feel strangely one-sided, as though the past has suddenly been rewritten to fit the latest storyline. If there is one person viewers would never have expected to become physically violent toward a woman, it has always been Will, making the show's apparent direction feel even more disconnected from everything that came before. Unfortunately, every new episode seems to reinforce the idea that this dramatic personality shift is only beginning. During one particularly emotional moment, Will admitted to Bill that he was beginning to scare himself, confessing that he no longer understood why he was behaving the way he was. It was a heartbreaking admission because it suggested that even Will could sense something changing inside him, something unfamiliar that he couldn't explain or control. That emotional uncertainty only intensified after Electra left with RJ, triggering Will's devastating collapse to his knees as he screamed her name in anguish. His raw desperation echoed through the moment with painful intensity, transforming heartbreak into something that bordered on emotional collapse. Rather than feeling like the reaction of a cold-hearted villain, it looked like a young man overwhelmed by fear, confusion, and the terrifying realization that his entire world might be slipping away. As Will struggles with those emotions, Ridge appears more convinced than ever that separating him from Electra is the only solution. Instead of allowing Electra to make her own decisions, Ridge begins pushing harder, insisting that she block Will's phone number, cut him completely out of her life, and choose where her loyalty truly belongs. His demands quickly evolve into an unmistakable ultimatum, forcing Electra to decide between the Spencer family and the Forresters, between the man she loves and the family pressuring her to walk away. At that point, Ridge's concern starts looking less like fatherly protection and more like outright intimidation. His determination to control Electra's future raises difficult questions about whether he is genuinely protecting her or simply manipulating the situation to fit the narrative he has already decided is true. The emotional pressure surrounding Electra grows heavier with every passing conversation, leaving her trapped between love and family expectations. The irony behind Ridge's accusations becomes harder to ignore the longer the storyline unfolds. If throwing punches automatically makes someone dangerous, then Ridge himself would certainly qualify after his own violent encounters with Bill. Brooke would also fit that description after striking Katie so forcefully, yet no one is warning their loved ones to stay away from them. Still, Ridge and RJ seem poised to continue amplifying every incident involving Will, portraying him as an unstable young man who could become violent at any moment. The possibility that Electra might become the victim of some imagined future act of domestic violence begins hanging over the story, despite the complete absence of any history suggesting Will would ever cross that line. Instead of allowing events to speak for themselves, the people around him appear ready to interpret every emotional reaction as proof that their fears were justified all along. Looking ahead, the situation seems destined to become even more explosive. If Electra ultimately follows Ridge's advice and distances herself from Will, RJ may see the breakup as the perfect opportunity to provoke him even further. It isn't difficult to imagine RJ mocking Will, rubbing the breakup in his face, and deliberately pressing every emotional button he can find until Will finally loses his temper once again. Should another confrontation erupt, the consequences could be far more severe than before. This time, Electra herself might be persuaded to call the police, especially if Ridge convinces her that involving law enforcement is the only way to protect herself. Another possibility is that RJ intentionally chooses a public place like the bikini bar, baiting Will in front of witnesses so that any reaction instantly turns into evidence against him, allowing RJ to present himself as the innocent victim while Will is led away in handcuffs. Even amid all that uncertainty, there may still be people willing to stand beside Will when everyone else turns against him. One of those people could be Melissa Dillon, someone who genuinely cares about him and understands the compassionate person he has always been. Rather than accepting the rumors surrounding his behavior, Dillon may become the one person willing to listen to Will's side of the story and remind others that this isn't the young man she knows. If RJ once again barges into Will's home, refusing to leave despite repeated warnings, Dillon might witness the entire encounter firsthand. In that case, she could become an important voice defending Will if the police become involved, explaining that RJ knowingly trespassed and deliberately escalated the confrontation. While some viewers have wondered whether Ridge might even threaten legal action against Will or attempt to use the situation as leverage against Bill Spencer, that possibility feels like an unusually high-stakes direction for the show's current storytelling. Eventually, however, this growing conflict seems destined to build toward one massive, emotionally charged climax. One possible outcome is a terrifying misunderstanding in which Electra appears to be in danger from Will, prompting RJ to attack him in what he later claims was self-defense. The scenario would echo one of the show's most memorable moments, when Brooke completely misread what she saw between Thomas and Hope near Steffi's cliffside home. Believing Hope was in danger, Brooke shoved Thomas over the edge of a cliff, only for Hope to reveal that Brooke had misunderstood the situation entirely. Thomas survived, but the incident left lasting emotional scars and proved how quickly assumptions can turn into tragedy. Since The Bold and the Beautiful has a long tradition of revisiting familiar storylines, and because Will lives in Malibu surrounded by dramatic cliffside landscapes, it would hardly be surprising if history repeated itself in another heartbreaking misunderstanding. Another possibility lingering on the horizon involves the eventual return of Ivy Forrester after Ashley Brewer's maternity leave. If she comes back, Ridge could easily pull her into this growing conflict, positioning Ivy as yet another protector standing between Electra and the version of Will that everyone insists is becoming increasingly dangerous. Whether that actually happens remains to be seen, but it fits neatly into the direction the story appears to be heading. Through every accusation, every confrontation, and every emotional breakdown, one fact continues to stand out above everything else. The Will Spencer viewers knew was never defined by violence, cruelty, or uncontrollable rage. Yet, despite years of portraying him as compassionate, loyal, and protective, the story now seems determined to transform him into someone almost unrecognizable, leaving fans to wonder whether this shocking new chapter will ultimately reveal a deeper purpose or simply rewrite one of the show's most likable characters beyond recognition.